Ladies and gents, my name is Xander, aka Deicide, and in this video, I've got my top 5 exotic weapons for PvP ever since the brand new Warmind DLC has arrived. As I'm sure that many of you are already aware, ever since the Warmind DLC has come out, all the old previous exotics, from the Curse of Osiris DLC, as well as the ones that came out with the initial launch of Destiny 2, all those exotics have gotten retuned and repurposed, and at the exact same time, they all have the option to now become masterworked. With this in mind, this top 5 list is solely looking at those weapons from the Curse of Osiris DLC as well as the ones from the initial launch, as those are the ones that got retuned and repurposed to make them more competitive and more exotic for the PvP environment. This video is not, and I repeat, not looking at weapons like that of the Huckleberry or the Soros regime or anything else that was exotic that came out in the Warmind DLC, nor is this video looking at anything that is consistent of a power weapon in any regard. In correlation with this, what this video is also taking into account is all the masterwork options and the masterwork potentials that all these brand new exotics have. However, all the weapons and all the footage that you're about to see currently have no masterwork equipped, but know that all masterwork options were certainly taken into account for the ranking of this particular list. The only thing left to do is to eviscerate that subscribe button, and let's jump right into the video. Arriving in the number 5 spot is an exotic hand cannon that I'm sure that many of you have already used, and it's called the SunShot. The wonderful thing about the SunShot is that it comes with 2 unique intrinsic perks, and the first one is called Sunburn, and Sunburn allows the weapon to fire explosive rounds and also highlights targets so they take damage from Sunshot. At the exact same time, this weapon also has another very unique perk, and that's called Sunblast, and Sunblast states that targets killed with Sunshot explode in a solar energy. The 2 main things that I want to point out about each one of these perks is that number 1, this weapon has explosive rounds, and that also implies that the weapon is going to have no damage fall off, at least for a portion of the weapon's overall damage output. In conjunction with this, Sunblast has now gotten buffed since the previous DLC, and so with Sunblast, you're now able to do more explosive radial damage than what you were previously, and I can tell you from personal experience that this is certainly a huge buff in the sense that you're going to be able to get much more damage, not just to get double kills, but potentially triple kills as well. In terms of this weapon's overall TTK, this thing is doing approximately 60 points of damage in the head and around 40 points of damage in the body. Now if we were to then go ahead and associate these 2 things with an optimal headshot TTK and a body shot TTK, this thing would then have a 1.2 seconds optimal headshot TTK, and this is then associated with 4 critical headshots. Looking at solely body shots and body shots alone, this thing then takes 1.6 seconds, and then that correlates to 5 body shots. In terms of a weapon's base TTK, it's actually not too shabby, and the overall average time to kill in this weapon is 1.4 seconds, meaning that it's still very competitive with other weapons in this exact same class, as well as other exotics in the entire game. Taking a brief look at the weapon's overall base stats, one thing truly shines above everything else, and that's the weapon's recoil direction at 98 out of 100. It's also got some other very promising base stats, such as an aim assistance at 60 out of 100, a handling at 83 out of 100, a reload speed at 75 out of 100, but the 2 areas in which this weapon is actually lacking is the weapon's stability and the weapon's range. The good news here for all of us is that, as soon as you happen to get the Catalyst, aka the Masterwork on the SunShot, you're going to get a 30-point increase in range and a 20-point increase in stability, and that's exactly what this weapon's going to need if you want to make it more competitive. The number 1 thing that I've noticed in terms of its overall con is that the weapon has significant damage fall off even though it still has explosive rounds. When you equip the Catalyst, that plus 30 in range is really going to make that huge drastic difference, allowing this thing to be used in close, mid, and potentially far-range engagements, making it an all-around more viable weapon, and when you combine that with the 20 points of consistent damage that it always does due to explosive rounds, this thing is bound to absolutely annihilate, eviscerate, and eradicate Guardians, making them explode into a nice fiery explosion. Appearing in the number 4 spot is an exotic sidearm that I'm sure that many of you have already forgotten about, and I'm here to remind you to not do so, as this thing is absolutely a powerhouse, and it's called the Rat King. The wonderful thing about the Rat King is that it has 2 very unique intrinsic perks, one of which is called Rat Pack and the other which is called Vermin. Rat Pack is going to allow the weapon to be fired in fully automatic version, and at the exact same time, it also becomes stronger the more allies that have it equipped. Before we go any further, there's one key huge distinction that I want to state here, and that's that Rat Pack now allows the weapon to be fired in fully automatic version, whereas with the previous DLC in Curse of Osiris, this thing was semi-automatic, and so in this regard, the Rat Pack perk now makes the Rat King much more viable and much more easier to use, and so I highly recommend that you guys give this thing a go. As I mentioned from earlier, the other very unique and intrinsic perk that can only be found in the Rat King is the perk called Vermin. And Vermin states that reloading immediately after a kill grants a very brief period of invisibility. The wonderful thing about invisibility is that it makes you a much harder target to hit, as the invisibility in this game is extremely good, and although the aim assist is still very effective even while you are invisible, it makes you a much harder target to hit, and because of this logic, you're then going to be able to obtain the weapon's optimal headshot TTK much more frequently. Speaking of which, I'm sure that many of you have already noticed that the weapon's headshot damage is around 38 points of damage in the head, and the weapon's body shot damage is then 29 points of damage in the body. Now, if we were to go ahead and associate these two things with an optimal headshot TTK and optimal body shot TTK, this weapon then has a 1.0 second optimal headshot TTK, and that's then going to correlate to 6 critical headshots. Looking at body shots and body shots only, the Rat King then takes 1.2 seconds as an optimal body shot, and then this is going to correspond to exactly 7 body shots. Taking these two things and averaging them together, you're then going to get an overall average time to kill at 1.1 seconds. And that, my friends, is by all means one of the best things about this Rat King as a whole, and that's because it makes it much more competitive with other weapons like that, the Midnight Coup, as the overall average time to kill and the optimal headshot time to kill on that weapon and this weapon are the exact same thing, which also means that this weapon has a much faster overall average time to kill than other weapons' optimal headshot time to kill. Understanding this, the weapon then has some other very great base stats, and that includes the weapon's aim assistance at 60 out of 100, with a great recoil direction at 80 out of 100, and a decent stability factor at 46. With these 3 base stats, the weapon already has a very good shot rhythm, but as soon as you happen to get the weapon's exotic catalyst, you're then going to increase the weapon's aim assistance and the weapon's recoil direction by a factor of 20, and that's going to give you an even better overall shot rhythm, allowing you to do much better in PvP. In correlation with this, the weapon also is then going to get an exotic perk from the exotic catalyst, and it's called Infestation. Infestation states that this weapon refreshes health on Vermin Invisibility trigger, and for this one factor, it's going to be absolutely extremely powerful, especially when you take into account the weapon's optimal headshot TTK and health regeneration at the exact same time. The only downside to this weapon is that it's got a very low base range stat, and that range stat is only at 37 out of 100. But other than this, I'm telling you guys that this Rat King is going to be an absolute powerhouse when you couple along the fact that it's fully automatic, is going to be able to allow you to go invisible, making you a much harder target to hit, and is also going to then regenerate your health at the exact same time, making this sidearm truly worthy of its exotic status. Making itself known in the number 3 spot is another exotic hand cannon, although it functions like an exotic pulse rifle, and that weapon is called the Crimson. The best thing about the Crimson is that this thing does happen to function like an exotic pulse rifle in the sense that it's got one perk called Banned Weapon, and that perk allows the weapon to fire a 3-round burst. But at the exact same time, it's also got another unique intrinsic perk, and that perk is called Cruel Remedy. Cruel Remedy states that kills with this weapon automatically heal the wielder, and precision kills also refill the magazine. Having a weapon that can instantaneously regenerate your health is such a huge advantage in PvP, and that's exactly what this Crimson handgun is going to do for you. When you combine the fact that if you're accurate enough with your shots, you're going to be able to get that instantaneous refill of the magazine, allowing you to go from one Guardian to the next, allowing this weapon to be very efficient in getting multi-kills. Now, what Bungie did to this weapon to make it more viable is they allowed the weapon to have a little bit of a faster rate of fire, but at the exact same time, they give it a much higher recoil direction, as the weapon is much more stable and allows you to hit plenty more headshots. Because of this fact, you're going to be able to hit the weapon's optimal headshot TTK much more frequently, while at the exact same time, proccing regen and ammo refill, making this thing a complete powerhouse. Taking a quick peek at this weapon's overall damage output, this thing is then doing 24 points of damage in the head and 17 points of damage in the body. Now if we were to then go ahead and convert these two things into an optimal headshot TTK and a body shot TTK, this Crimson hand cannon is going to take 9 critical headshots, which is then going to correspond to a 1.1 second optimal headshot TTK. Looking at solely body shots and body shots alone, this thing's then going to take 12 body shots, and that's then going to relate to a 1.59 second body shot TTK. Averaging these two things together is then going to give you an overall average time to kill at 1.38 seconds, making this thing once again very viable in many factors of PvP. Now if we were to go ahead and look at this weapon's overall base stats, there's a couple of these that stand out to me, and that includes the weapon's aim assistance at 75 out of 100, its recoil direction at 55 out of 100, the weapon's range at 60, and its stability at 82. Now if you thought that this weapon was lacking in just a little bit of the range department, which I honestly do think that it does just ever so slightly, the good news here is that the Crimson's Catalyst is then going to give you an additional 20 points in range, making it so that this weapon has an overall range factor at 80, and for a pulse rifle, that is actually spectacular and marvelous, and makes it so that this weapon is going to easily be able to compete in cross-map engagements. Because this weapon is going to be able to heal you as soon as you get a kill, potentially refill your magazine, allowing you to never have to reload, and also allows the user to have cross-map potential, easily makes this thing into my number 3 spot, and so I would highly recommend that you guys use this thing so that you can become a Grim Reaper. Inserting itself in the number 2 spot is an exotic pulse rifle that seems like it's come from the heavens themselves, and it's called the Vigilance Wing. If you're a Guardian that's played PvP, I can guarantee you that you've heard this fantastic thing, and that's because this thing has some of the best base stats, as well as some of the best perks, and some of the best TTKs that you will ever see on any exotic weapon, or any weapon in general throughout all of Destiny 2. If you were to ask me, the main reason why this thing is so unbelievably powerful is because of 2 of its very unique intrinsic perks, and next comes after that is the weapon's TTKs, but we're going to get into that in just a second. The first intrinsic perk this thing's got is a perk called Harsh Truths, and this perk states that this weapon can fire a 5-round burst, and simultaneously, whenever an ally is killed, you gain health regeneration and increased movement speed. This one perk alone allows the weapon to easily have an exotic status, as there is no other pulse rifle in this game that can fire a 5-round burst. When you include the fact that it can get health regeneration just by simply having an ally who's dead next to you, that is a marvelous thing and makes it so that it encourages team shots, and that's what Destiny 2 is all about. In correlation with Harsh Truths, the weapon also has another great unique intrinsic perk, and it's called Last Stand. And Last Stand states that this weapon has improved weapon performance and greatly increases recovery when the wielder is the last living member of a fire team. In this case, this thing is very ideal then for other game modes that include Last Man Standing, such as that of Survival or even that of Countdown, and I can guarantee you that that one perk alone has saved my bacon more times than I can possibly count. In terms of the 5-round burst, there is one thing that I had to note right here, and that's that in the previous DLC, there was no real update in terms of how this weapon is going to be effective, but what Bungie did do is they decreased the duration from burst to burst, making this thing much more ideal and making it also very lenient, just in case you happen to miss a little bit of a burst here or a little bit of a burst there. The reason that I mention this is because it allows the weapon to become much more lenient, and this leniency is going to allow you to hit either body shots or headshots, and as you guys can tell throughout this entire game footage, you're doing 20 points of damage in the head and 15 points of damage in the body. Now if you were to then go ahead and associate these two things with an optimal headshot TTK and a body shot TTK, the optimal headshot on the Vigilance Wing is then going to take 10 critical headshots, aka only 2 bursts, and this is then going to correspond to a 1.02 second optimal headshot TTK. Looking at body shots and body shots only, this thing's then going to take 14 body shots, 3 bursts as a maximum, and then that's going to relate to a 1.47 second body shot TTK. Averaging these two things together, the overall average time to kill on its weapon is 1.25 seconds, and that, my friends, is truly spectacular and marvelous because it allows the weapon to be very competitive, not just with weapons like that of the Last Hope or the Anti-OD, but it gets us on the very first kill, and when you combine that with the other weapons' perks, it becomes truly exceptional. If this weapon didn't already have enough phenomenal perks as is, it gets even better, because as soon as you happen to make this weapon Masterwork and equip the catalyst, this thing then gets the perk, a full auto trigger system, and it simply allows the weapon to be fired in full auto, making this thing an absolute monstrosity, or at least that's what I imagine it to be. Another reason why this weapon is so unbelievably powerful is because of the weapon's very good base stats, and that includes the weapon's aim assistance at 60 out of 100, a marvelous recoil direction at 79 out of 100, an exceptional range factor at 64, and a great stability factor at 64 as well. Those 4 stats right there are by all means the most important stats on this entire weapon as a whole, and that's because it allows the weapon to be used in close, mid, and far range engagements due to that range factor at 64. But in correlation with this, the weapon's stability, aim assistance, and recoil direction allow the weapon to have a marvelous shot rhythm and or shot cadence, which is easily the most important thing on any weapon in this entire game. When you look at this weapon as a whole, it has the best overall TTK stats that we've ever discussed throughout this entire video so far, and it's also got some of the best perks to not only increase the weapon's overall effectiveness, but increases the user's ability to not just regenerate health, but also increase movement speed, and that's exactly what you're looking for in very competitive environments. So if I was you, I would take this thing out of the vault right now, use it in PvP, because one thing's for sure, that if you do so, you're certainly going to become an Angel of Death. Making itself known in the #1 spot is another exotic pulse rifle, and it's one that can distort space and time, and that weapon is called the Graviton Lance. The main thing that you gotta know about the Graviton Lance is that this thing is very, very exotic, and the reason why it is so is because it's technically classified as a pulse rifle, but it only fires 2 shots and not 3 or 5 like that of the Vigilance Wing. The reason why this is so great is because of the weapon's very unique intrinsic perks, and that's called Black Hole along with Cosmology. Black Hole states that the second shot of a burst rips a hole through space-time, and it does very high damage and recoil with no damage falloff. In correlation with this is Cosmology, and Cosmology states that kills with this weapon cause enemy targets to detonate and spawn void projectiles that track targets. The key thing that I want to note here is that, as soon as you happen to actually annihilate a Guardian with this Graviton Lance, the black hole effect is going to happen exactly where that Guardian is down, or very, very close to it. And so essentially what that means is that their body is then going to explode and then detonate void projectiles that can easily damage other Guardians with a wide radius, allowing the weapon to have a great overall effectiveness to cover multiple Guardians. I can't tell you as to how many times that Cosmology with that one perk alone has actually detonated and not just down one Guardian, but 2 Guardians, making this thing incredibly powerful. This is actually one thing that Bungie did from the previous DLC to now, is that they made this one perk of Cosmology much more effective, and now it has a much wider radius and also does more damage to the enemy Guardians who are around when those void projectiles actually detonate. As I mentioned from before, this weapon is doing 2 shots, and on the first shot, it's doing either 8 or 12 points of damage for the body and headshot respectively, as well as the second shot, which is then doing 40 points of damage in the body or 59 points of damage in the head. Now if we were to then go ahead and associate these 2 things with an optimal headshot TTK and a body shot TTK, this Graviton Lance can do an optimal headshot TTK at 1.16 seconds, and it only takes 6 critical headshots to do so. Looking at body shots and body shots only, the Graviton Lance is going to take 1.87 seconds, and then that's then going to correspond to 9 body shots. Taking an overall average of these 2 things and dividing by 2, the average time to kill on this Graviton Lance is at 1.51 seconds. And although this overall average TTK may not seem that great, there are other reasons why this thing makes the #1 spot, and that includes the weapon's other base stats, as well as the weapon's catalyst. Before we get into the catalyst, the next thing that I want to take a look at is the weapon's base stats. And the thing that stands out above the rest is the weapon's stability at 100 out of 100. Essentially what this means is that the weapon is extremely stable, and that then is going to imply that you're going to get plenty of headshots, and when you combine this with the fact that the weapon also has a great aim assistance at 60 and a recoil direction at 65, that means that the weapon has a stupendous and truly glorious overall shot rhythm, allowing you to get that very, very fast TTK on a much more frequent basis. The other stat that I want to point out here is the weapon's range, as it's at 55 out of 100, and this range is great for not just close and mid-range engagements, but it has a decent enough range to do some far-range engagements, but it's truly not ideal. The good news here though is that the weapon's catalyst, aka Masterwork, is not only going to increase the weapon's range by 20, but it's also going to increase the weapon's aim assistance by an additional 20, and it's even going to give the Graviton Lance an additional perk called Hidden Hand, which is further going to increase the weapon's target acquisition. Essentially what this means is that you're going to have a weapon that has a base range factor at 75 out of 100, and that's then going to equate so that you can use this thing in close, mid, and far range engagements as long as you can understand the weapon shot rhythm. Because this weapon has a stability factor at 100 out of 100, a recoil direction that's fantastic, and an aim assistance that's already at 80 in conjunction with that Hidden Hand to improve it even more, this weapon's overall shot rhythm is going to be through the roof, and like I said from before, that is by all means the most important factor into any weapon in this entire game. With this weapon's ability to have no damage fall off on the second shot, in association with the weapon's void projectiles that track targets, and when you also take into account the weapon's insane range, and in my humble opinion, the weapon's shot rhythm that is better than any other weapon in this entire game, it's no wonder that this exotic pulse rifle called the Graviton Lance is easily considered to be in my #1 spot, and it's obviously going to rip through plenty of holes in space-time, making the enemy guardians a little bit salty. With all of this being said, you guys now know my top 5 exotics that have been repurposed within the Warmind DLC, and they are all now certainly what I would consider to be exotic and much more viable in the PvP environment. The only other thing that I really want to state is that I looked at other exotics like that, the Sturm and the Drang, the Jade Rabbit, the Skyburner Zoth, the Hardlight, the Risk Runner, and other exotics like that, and to me, none of them really seemed like they stood out to that much or to that extent to the point where they could be included in this list. Having said this, I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this stuff down in the comment section below, and which other exotic weapons that you think should have made the list, whether you agree with this list or you don't, and I also want to know your thought process and logic and reasoning behind that, as you can guarantee that I'm definitely going to read exactly what you guys have to say. Lastly, go ahead and check out some of my other new videos, as you guys can see right there on the screen. If you happen to enjoy this one, then you're definitely going to enjoy those as well. That's pretty much all I've got for you as of right now. And so as always, deislayers, great gaming, until next time.